Margaret Ellenson was a lumen built of quiet truths. A retired nurse, she believed in prevention, in careful measures, and in the sturdy foundation of a life well lived. The small suburban house she shared with her late husband, Arthur, was her testament. Paid off after 30 years of meticulous budgeting, it was a sanctuary of brick and memory. When her son, Daniel, came to her with a business plan, his eyes bright with the ambition she'd always fostered, her caution battled with her love. The plan was for a cafe, a respectable neighborhood spot with artisanal coffee and local pastries. It was a good dream. The only problem was the bank. They needed more collateral. "It's just a formality, Mom," Daniel had said, his hand covering hers on the cold bank table. "To show them I have your support. The business will pay for itself in a year." Margaret looked at the loan documents, her home, Arthur's home, listed in the cold transactional print. She hesitated, but then she looked at her son, the boy she'd raised to be a good man, and signed away her sanctuary. For the next 6 months, the silence was the first sign of the rot. When Margaret asked Daniel about the cafe's grand opening, his answers were vague. "Delays with permits, Mom. You know how it is." When she offered to help paint or set up tables, he'd gently refuse. "It's all handled, really. You should be resting." At a family dinner, Daniel's new wife, a woman with eyes as sharp and polished as her jewelry, commented on the rising crime in Margaret's neighborhood. "We've been telling her to sell for years," she'd said to a cousin, as if Margaret wasn't there. "That old house is more of a liability than an asset these days." Margaret felt a familiar chill, the cold sting of invisibility. The 1,000 small cuts continued. A call from the bank's fraud department, a courtesy check on a large equipment purchase. "Just some high-end espresso machines from Italy. Gotta have the best to compete." He didn't mention the equipment was a set of professional poker tables. The final truth, as it often does, came without warning. Margaret had baked Daniel's favorite lemon meringue pie, a small peace offering after another canceled Sunday brunch. She decided to drop it off at his house unannounced, hoping to catch him for a quick chat. The front door was slightly ajar. She could hear voices from inside, Daniel and his wife. She paused, about to call out, when her daughter-in-law's voice, sharp with anxiety, stopped her cold. "Daniel, this is getting out of hand. What if she drives by and sees it's not a cafe? What if she finds out where the money really went?" Margaret's hand froze on the doorknob. She heard Daniel laugh, a low, dismissive sound that broke her heart. "Relax. My mother trusts me completely. Besides, she's getting old. Her memory isn't what it used to be. She just needs to feel like she's helping. As long as we keep her at a distance, she'll never know." He wasn't just lying to her. He was leveraging her love, weaponizing her trust, and banking on her decline. He saw her not as his mother, but a fool to be managed. But the true confrontation didn't come from Margaret. It came 2 weeks later in the form of 2 grim-faced detectives at her front door. They were polite, professional, but their questions were surgical. "Mrs. Ellenson," the older one began, his voice gentle, "we need to talk to you about your son's business." He slid a glossy photograph across her perfectly polished kitchen table. It wasn't a cafe. It was a smoky, windowless back room, and at the center of it, under a single harsh light, sat her son, Daniel, not pouring coffee, but dealing cards to a table of hard-faced men, a mountain of cash piled in front of him. "Ma'am, what can you tell us about your son's underground poker room?"
The detectives left 2 things behind: a glossy 8x10 photograph of her son's betrayal, and a silence that consumed the house. For an hour, Margaret sat at her kitchen table, staring at the picture. The shock had receded, replaced by a chilling, crystalline clarity. The grief was still there, a dull ache beneath her ribs, but it was no longer the driving force. A new emotion was taking its place: resolve. She walked into Arthur's old study, a room she'd kept exactly as he'd left it, and picked up the phone. She dialed a number she knew by heart. "Carol, it's Margaret. I need you to come over. Something has happened." Carol arrived within 30 minutes, her practical, no-nonsense energy a grounding force in the chaos of Margaret's thoughts. She was a retired forensic accountant, a woman who understood that the truth was often buried in the fine print. Margaret laid out the story, her voice steady and detached, presenting the facts as if they belonged to someone else. The loan, the cafe lie, the underground poker room. Carol listened without interruption, her expression hardening with each new detail. "The ungrateful little monster," she said finally, her voice laced with the quiet fury of a true friend. "After everything you've done." He saw me as a means to an end, a bank account with a fading memory. Carol looked at the police photograph on the table. "So what's the next move? They'll freeze his assets. The bank will come for your house to cover the loan." "No," Margaret said, a flicker of something new in her eyes. "They won't." She stood up and walked over to Arthur's old filing cabinet, a room she'd kept exactly as he'd left it, and picked up the phone. She dialed a number she knew by heart. "Years ago, when we paid off the mortgage, Arthur insisted we see his lawyer. He said it was just estate planning, something to protect the house from unforeseen circumstances." Her fingers skimmed over folders labeled taxes, wills, insurance, and then she saw it. A thick, leather-bound folder she hadn't opened in a decade, tucked away in the back, almost hidden. She pulled it out, blowing a thin layer of dust from its cover. The gold lettering was faint, but clear. Homestead Protection Trust. "My God," Carol whispered, as Margaret placed the document on the desk. She opened it, her fingers tracing the dense legal text. Her eyes stopped on a specific clause, underlined twice in Arthur's neat, precise hand. She began to read aloud, her voice growing stronger with each word. "This property, designated as the primary homestead, shall be protected from use as collateral for any and all business loans, ventures, or financial instruments deemed by the trustee to be of high risk, speculative, or non-traditional nature." Carol let out a low whistle. "Arthur, that magnificent man. He built a legal firewall around your home." "He knew," Margaret said. A single, difficult tear traced a path down her cheek. "He saw this coming." She closed the folder with a soft, final thud. Her grief had now fully crystallized into purpose. She picked up the phone again, her movements no longer hesitant but deliberate. She dialed the number for Arthur's old law firm. "Yes," she said into the receiver, her voice calm and absolute. "I'd like to speak with Mr. Albright. Tell him I'm calling about the Ellison Homestead Trust. It's time to execute the protocol." After the call, Margaret sat in the study's armchair, the trust document in her lap. The war was not over, but the first decisive shot had been fired. A minute later, her cell phone buzzed on the desk. A text from Daniel, his first contact since the night of the dinner. The message was a single, panicked question. "Mum, the bank just called about the loan. What did you do?"
Margaret ignored the text. Answering would be like trying to reason with a house fire. You don't negotiate, you call the fire department. Her fire department was Mr. Albright, a man whose voice carried the reassuring weight of billable hours and legal precedent. The next morning, Albright's office sent a certified letter to the bank's legal department, attaching a copy of the Homestead Protection Trust. It was a single, devastatingly precise legal strike. The response was not immediate, but when it came, it was not from the bank. It was from Daniel, He didn't text this time. He showed up at her door, his wife in tow, both of them radiating a manicured panic. "Mom, what have you done?" he began, trying to push his way inside. "The bank called. They're reviewing the loan. They're talking about fraud." "It seems they're finally doing their due diligence," Margaret replied, blocking the doorway with a quiet finality she hadn't possessed a week ago. It was then that her daughter-in-law Jessica stepped forward. "This is your fault," she hissed, her voice a sharp contrast to her elegant cashmere coat. "You set him up." "I set him up for a legitimate business. He's the one who built a criminal enterprise on the foundation of my trust." That was when Daniel shifted his strategy from panic to public relations. The next day, a post appeared on the neighborhood community page. It was a photo of Daniel and Jessica looking solemn, captioned with a carefully crafted tale of woe. "It's with a heart heavy that we share our recent struggles. My mother, who is getting on in years and showing signs of confusion, has unfortunately become the target of a predatory financial scheme. They have manipulated her into taking actions that are jeopardizing our family business and home. We ask for your prayers as we navigate this difficult time and try to protect her." The comments flooded in, a torrent of misplaced sympathy. "So sorry to hear this, Daniel. Elder abuse is a real problem. Let us know if we need anything." Carol read them aloud over the phone, her voice tight with rage. "He's painting you as a senile victim, Margaret. He's using your age as a weapon to discredit you." "I know," Margaret said calmly, looking out her window at the meat rows of her garden. "It's a classic misdirection. When you can't defend your actions, you attack the character of your accuser." "So what are you going to do?" Carol demanded. "Post the bank statements? The trust document? You have to fight back." "Oh, I will," Margaret replied, "but not in a forum moderated by the Neighborhood Watch." She didn't post a rebuttal. She didn't engage in the online spectacle. Instead, she made one more call, not to a lawyer this time, to a local investigative reporter she'd read for years, a woman with a reputation for dismantling the carefully constructed facades of the wealthy and powerful. She introduced herself, explained the situation with clinical precision, and emailed the reporter the single piece of evidence that would change the narrative entirely: a copy of the certified letter her lawyer had sent to the bank. The letter contained the trust, and the trust was not a weapon of confusion. It was an instrument of absolute, undeniable truth. Margaret hung up the phone. She had armed the third party. Now she would simply wait for them to pull the trigger.
The reporter, a woman named Miss Jennings, with a shark smile and a reporter's tenacity, did not disappoint. The article that ran on the front page of the local Sunday paper was a masterclass in controlled demolition. It didn't just report Margaret's side of the story, it laid out the hard evidence. A redacted copy of the trust, a timeline of the loan, and an expertly worded no comment from the bank that screamed guilt. The online community page, once a bastion of sympathy for Daniel, flipped overnight. The narrative of the confused old mother dissolved, replaced by the story of a cunning son who had defrauded her. The public frame job had backfired spectacularly. This led to the gauntlet of fools. Daniel's first move was a clumsy attempt at a public apology posted as a comment on the article. "There has been a deep misunderstanding," he wrote, "fueled by my mother's recent health issues. I love her dearly, and we are working through this privately." Margaret's phone buzzed with Carol's immediate reaction. "He's doubling down on the senile angle." But the public wasn't buying it.
The top reply to Daniel's comment, with over 500 likes, was from a local lawyer. Misunderstanding. The trust document seems perfectly clear to me. The second attempt was more personal. Daniel and Jessica appeared at her door, this time with a bouquet of funereal lilies and rehearsed expressions of remorse. "Mom, we were wrong," Daniel began, his voice slick with practiced contrition. "I was under pressure. I made a terrible mistake. Please, can we just fix this?" Jessica chimed in. "We're worried about you, about your health." Margaret looked from the flowers to their faces, searching for a flicker of genuine remorse. She found none. She saw only the desperate calculations of people trying to salvage their public image and financial future. "The only thing I need fixed," Margaret said, her voice quiet but unyielding, "is the fraudulent lien against my house. The rest is between you and your conscience, assuming you can locate it." She closed the door on their stunned faces. The final, most depraved gambit was what Carol later dubbed the baby bait. A week later, Margaret received a letter from Jessica's lawyer. It stated that due to the extreme emotional distress caused by Margaret's aggressive and unwarranted legal actions, Jessica was experiencing complications with a previously unannounced pregnancy. The letter was a thinly veiled threat, back off, or you'll be responsible for harming your unborn grandchild. Margaret read the letter, folded it neatly, and placed it in a file labeled extortion. Then she called Mr. Albright. "I think it's time," she said, "to move from defense to offense. Let's talk about the bank's culpability in this matter. The war was won. It was time to salt the earth."
The final reckoning was not a dramatic courtroom showdown, but a series of quiet, procedural checkmates. Albright's legal team, armed with the trust and evidence of the bank's negligent underwriting, didn't just sue to have the lien removed, but threatened a lawsuit against the bank itself for predatory lending practices involving a vulnerable elder, the very narrative Daniel had tried to weaponize against her. Faced with a public relations nightmare and clear legal liability, the bank folded. Within a month, they not only released the lien on her home, but also agreed to an out-of-court settlement with Margaret for their role in the debacle. It was a quiet, crushing victory. The villain's collapse followed swiftly. With the bank's pressure gone, Margaret's legal team turned their full attention to Daniel. The threat of a civil suit for fraud, combined with the public evidence of his illegal gambling operation, left him with no leverage. The procedural takedown was swift. Albright negotiated a settlement where Daniel, to avoid further legal action, signed over his only significant asset, a small portfolio of stocks Arthur had gifted him years ago, to a trust for his and Jessica's future child. He had traded his father's legacy for a few months of illegal profit. The financial account was zeroed out. The news of his financial ruin was the final blow to his and Jessica's carefully constructed world. The last contact Margaret had from them was a single, unsigned text message. It simply said, "Are you happy now?" She read the message, a final, pathetic plea for an emotional reaction where none was deserved. She looked at the words, a digital ghost of the family she thought she had. Then, with a quiet finality, she deleted the message and blocked the number. The ledger was balanced. The account was closed. She was free.
Margaret sold the house. It was a sanctuary no longer, but a monument to a painful truth. She bought a smaller, sun-drenched condo in a different town, a place with no memories but the ones she was now free to create. The new sanctuary was smaller, but it was entirely her own. its walls echoing not with the ghosts of duty, but with the quiet hum of earned peace. Her found community was not a replacement family, but something more authentic. She started volunteering at a local financial literacy clinic for single mothers. Her quiet competence and deep well of experience a lifeline for women navigating their own difficult paths. One of her clients, a young woman named Sarah, with eyes that held the same fierce determination Margaret now saw in her own mirror, became a friend. They met for coffee, shared stories, and built a new kind of bond, one forged not in obligation, but in mutual respect. One sunny afternoon, sitting with Sarah on her new balcony overlooking a small, peaceful garden, Margaret felt a profound sense of closure. Her journey proved that the greatest power isn't in enduring disrespect, but in meticulously drafting the invoice for it. If you believe in the power of a balanced ledger, subscribe to this channel and witness the next audit. What was the one small thing someone did that proved their disrespect was intentional?